What's up, everybody? Big Herc 916 getting down with Fresh Out. And we have today a very special guest that wants to share some information that you guys want to really hear. So, Grant, man, let's get into your story, man. Share to people like a little bit about your background and some of the stuff you want to kind of blow the lid on.
Yeah, so my name's Grant. I'm a young professional. Um, the first big job that I got was being an IRS agent. Uh, I was an IRS agent for approximately 3 years, and I saw a lot of things. Um, Unfortunately, a lot of those were not so good. Um, well, where do I start? Well, when you're in the IRS, you see a lot of things that you wouldn't believe you didn't see firsthand. So one of the biggest things, I'm I was forced out of the IRS because they say they're protected disclosures, but um, I made protected disclosures about a lot of things. I would say perhaps the most disturbing thing I witnessed is that, um, for whatever reason, IRS management actually protected ISIS. And this was around the summer of 2022, around June, July. I was auditing a faction of ISIS, um, and I was quite surprised
How
that
how'd you know how'd you know with a faction of ISIS? I mean, what was that giveaway? I mean, and how do they legitimately audit ISIS when it's supposed to be an illegal organization?
well, believe it or not, um, so there's a lot to it, but you know, I audited exempt organizations. So these are mainly they're nonprofits, and these encompass a lot of different things, anywhere from public charities to you know nonprofit cemetery companies. And you know, there's an application process where organizations can actually apply to get tax exempt status. Okay. And a lot of times they want to get this a lot for different reasons, but mainly they want to get this because they get that tax exempt status. It helps them get funding, especially funding from the government. And so they were looking to get funding, including funding from the government. And
From the United States government?
yeah, and yeah, so of course, when you're auditing a faction of ISIS, what you do is you go and you try to get this, investigated by anti-terror, because I mean, they're a faction of ISIS. And my manager, my supervisory agent, for whatever reason, he would not allow anti-terror to investigate this faction.
Hmm.
And you know, I
So did he basically tell you to shut down that audit, or what did you think that he was in on it or knew something about it? I mean, what was his reasoning?
he gave me a bunch of BS. Um, I was floored by it. Um, I still to this day I don't know exactly why. Um, but he just, for whatever reason, he was hell bent on making sure that it didn't get investigated by anti-terror.
So was this a random audit? I mean, or was there a red flag, like a lot of money was going through this organization? What even prompted the audit?
Well, believe it or not, they were applying for tax exempt status, and call me crazy, but I think it would be a slam dunk to refer a faction of ISIS to anti-terror. But that's just me. So, yeah, that's the main reason why I was auditing it and why I
But I
came.
mean, you're saying a faction of ISIS. I mean, what was that giveaway though? I mean, because nobody's going to put ISIS on their application,
No,
and
they put it on the application.
they put ISIS on the application.
Mm-hmm. Yep. And I
Wow,
went through. It was like, yep, that's ISIS.
wow. So, was there other audits that had the same result when they found out these, there was a terrorist organization,
Big
or
hurt.
was this just something random?
Let me tell you something. So, anti-terror management expects us to put anti-terror through a lot of, they want a bunch of different people, okay? That I can tell just by doing research that you know they're not terrorists, things like that. Because the thing is that they also will look at individuals too. Maybe the organization itself isn't a terrorist organization. Maybe an individual itself within it is affiliated with terror, and so
But
yeah, it,
what allows them to define a terrorist organization? I mean, we know ISIS just by what we read and we know about like publicly what we've been informed about. But like, are there organizations like that come up on that list that you guys look for certain things? I mean, what is there red flags or?
so yeah, so I mean, you look at OFAC, okay, the OFAC sanctions list search. Um, I believe that's what it's called. It might be slightly different with OFAC sanctions list search. That's what we use. And so you can type in individuals' names, you can type in organizations' names, and yeah, if there's any flags whatsoever, it'll pop up. And I didn't have to do that for a faction of ISIS. I mean, it's just
Uh,
just it's a faction of ISIS.
while you were working there, have did you see the IRS weaponized in any fashion as far as for certain individuals that they wanted to target for maybe political or for other reasons?
Unfortunately, I have. See, and it's really sad. There was another situation where there was IRS management. I witnessed firsthand them orchestrate a targeting scheme against fire departments. I'm sorry, one of my lights went out. Ugh. So, anyways, so they are orchestrating a targeting scheme against fire departments. So here's the deal. So
So
fire
they were
departments,
going after fire departments.
yes. So here's the deal, Big Kirk. So fire departments, okay, they're they're entitled to receive deductible contributions under IRC Section 170C1. And if you look at Revenue Procedure 95-48, it explicitly states that any organization, okay, that is not a private organization, that not a private foundation, so it'd be like a lot of times there's such and such foundation, So any organization that's not a private foundation, okay, that's entitled to receive deductible contributions under IRC Section 170C1, like fire departments, okay, they are eligible for what's referred to as a 990 filing exemption. Because, see, generally speaking, nonprofits, a lot of people get this confused. Nonprofits have to file an annual information return. It's on Form 990, okay? And while a lot of times, sometimes they'll pay like excise taxes, but a lot of times, like public charities, they don't pay any tax unless maybe unrelated business income, things like that. But most of the time, these 990s, okay, they are just for informational purposes. So we can just track what they're doing, things like that. Okay. And so the thing is that, and you can even look at Revenue Procedure 95-48. It even states in there that it was created for the specific purpose, okay, of, helping, I can't remember the exact wording, but like the efficient administration of internal revenue laws. Okay, like for example, nonprofit volunteer fire departments. Okay, they're not high risk. Okay, they're not, generally speaking, tax shelters like we see sometimes with these, organizations that are that have big ties with related for profits. Okay, they're fire departments. They go out and do you know they they're inherently, a lot of times they're tied with the government. That's why they're so low risk. Okay, now, and on top of that too, the IRM. Okay, the IRM. Okay, it lists procedures that IRS agents are supposed to follow. Okay, and the IRM specifically states that organizations that qualify for the exemption under Revenue Procedure 95-48, okay, they do not even have to ask for this 990 filing exemption. So what that means is that a nonprofit volunteer fire department, they don't even have to ask for the 990 filing exemption to get it. Okay, you're supposed to give it to them regardless. Okay, and you will see that a lot with these organizations. They just don't know any better, so they never ask for it. And here's the thing. Okay, so let's say we have a fire department. Okay, they don't know any better. They're just doing, putting out fires, things like that. Okay, they don't understand laws or taxes, the way they probably should. So they'll apply for tax exemption. Okay, they'll get it. Okay, and you have to keep in mind that it costs a user fee to get it. So back when I was there, it was like $600. Okay, so they pay $600. They get recognized as tax exempt. So what happens is that 3 years will go by and they don't file the Form 990. So what happens is that they get what referred to as automatically revoked. They get their tax exempt status automatically revoked, which means that once they go 3 years without filing the Form 990, they're no longer recognized as tax exempt. Okay, does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
And so now what they have to do is they have to go apply again. Okay, they have to apply again, and they have to fork up another $600. And they can do that. I've seen not just fire departments, but other organizations, they'll do it 3 or 4 times. They'll end up forking, it can add up. Okay, and especially if it's a small fire department, it can add up to big things. I mean, just a couple of months ago, I heard there might have been some issues down in California with the fire departments, and their funding. So I just found it really disturbing, because the thing is that IRS management, they actually issued guidance to not give that 990 filing exemption to fire departments unless they asked for it, even though per our own IRM, they don't have to. And it defeats the spirit of 95-48, the revenue procedure. Okay? Because organizations like nonprofit volunteer fire departments, they're, having them file the Form 990, that undermines, the efficient administration of internal revenue laws.
So, okay, targeting those organizations because they didn't file their 990 form. I mean, I could, I could see that now based on them not having their filing after 3 years. I mean, but have you seen where there's been like a collaborative effort, but maybe between the IRS and other law enforcement organizations to go after certain individuals because of maybe certain things that you've seen politically, or do they look for, have there been instances where you've seen people unfairly targeted?
Well, I'll tell you, it happens, because I work specifically in EO determinations. Okay, that was actually, believe it or not, that was actually the unit that was responsible for the Tea Party scandal. So, I know they said they're not supposed to do it. They have done some things where they kind of try to make it look. See, the thing you got to remember with the IRS is that unfortunately, I learned the hard way is that they aren't so much interested in integrity, but the image of integrity. So, for example, these political organizations. So, a lot of time, you're supposed to, you're supposed to, you know, you're supposed to be fair to everyone, right? And unfortunately, that's just that's not quite what we've seen with these political organizations. Like, for example, if you see it's an organization involved in politics, automatically, boom, it gets flagged. And
So, what do you think was the reasoning of your manager knowing that this was an ISIS organization? Was that something you think that was said from up above, like let that organization, fly by, don't give them any scrutiny? I mean, what would be
ISIS?
the purpose of that? What's that?
Are you talking about ISIS, the faction of
Yeah,
ISIS?
yeah, 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 yeah. Just because I'm saying, they if they're targeting these, certain, you're saying the fire department, they're sweating them about a 990 form. I
Mm-hmm.
mean, what would be the purpose of them telling you to back up from an organization that should have been investigated under the anti-terrorist?
Well, I, you know, unfortunately, a lot of things about the IRS is backwards. Um, it's it's really sad. The only I, viewers can connect their own dots. For me personally, you know, it's scary to think about. Um, I've seen some things in the news. It just there's some very dark things going on in our government, Big Kirk. Some very dark, evil things.
Like, what would you say those things are?
Um, well, personally, well, if we're gonna if we're gonna talk politics, so you know, there's a lot of for some reason it seems like there's a lot of people that are high in our high in society that seem to profit a lot off of war, which is sick. And if they fund ISIS, they leave ISIS alone. That's just the way to keep conflict in our society. Um, it's just so backwards.
So, are you insinuating that by ignoring um, certain obvious red flags that it allows money to continue to flow to generate profits?
Um, well, what you're doing is you're allowing terrorism to be funded. I mean, it's just that's what it is.
So, what about, like, what do you think about a lot of the NGOs? I mean, do they fall under that same nonprofit status?
A lot of times they can. Um, so yeah, a lot of times they do. They can get tax exempt under 501(c)(3). They can get tax exempt under 501(c)(4). Yeah, and they take it. A lot of them take advantage of it big time.
Hmm. Um, Now, as far as something like maybe the American public doesn't understand about the tax system, and like the fact that they're, say, filing their taxes and claiming certain things, um, is there is there anything that you could share, like, that would enlighten the person who's kind of like just robotically filing taxes and don't understand it? Like, is there language? I know the language. A lot of people don't really understand, like, the difference between income and wages, and certain things, and how to claim certain things. Is there any insight into that you could share?
Well, so where I worked in EO determinations, we had this thing called the master file. Okay, and so the master file. So like the W-2s you get, the 1099-Rs. You know, or like the organizations, a lot of times I dealt with force firsthand, that would have to pay employment taxes and pay those returns or the 990s. Okay. You know, those are in a system. Okay. So a lot of times what the IRS will do is, like, let's say, you know, like, this is all in the system. So, I can tell you firsthand, when I was auditing nonprofits, I could see exactly, what 90 was filed. If they're employing people, I could see what, 941s were filed. If they were contracting someone, I could see if they were filed 1099. So the IRS can see it, unless there's a caveat. If the person that's like, for example, like if your employer, if they don't file the W-2, then they won't be able to see it. So, I mean, hypothetically, if your employer doesn't file a W-2 and you don't file a W-2, the employee, then they wouldn't know about it. But the caveat is that, a lot of times, you're probably working for a business, and that business, they want to claim the deduction. So what they're doing is they're going to have to file a W-2 in order to claim that deduction. So,
So if you hypothetically, if you have a business and you got employees and these people never filed into the system, they basically would never exist and they would never pop up on the radar as having a tax liability. Is that correct?
well, yes, that's correct. However, there are ways to get around that. And so I can tell you firsthand, I hear a lot about the IRS doesn't call people and not. That's not entirely true. I can tell you my own department, there are situations where we actually were allowed to call people. And in that case that you're talking about, the one way you get around it is someone just tells me. So they're telling like, oh, I was being employed for such and such amount of years, and I've been scamming the system. If you tell me that, I mean, that's great. I can just go back and fix it, and they can get audited and all that. So yeah, so what you're saying is true, but a lot of times people forget is that if almost it's like a form of snitching on yourself, isn't it? You just tell me,
Yeah.
and yeah, then I would know about it. Then you can get audited and go through all that great stuff where, you can get assessed and pay penalties and interest on those wages that you weren't reporting.
So for the average working class person who's being taxed up to 40, 38, 40% of their income, 45%, what what can they do to kind of lower their tax liability? I mean, is there, they're not a rich person, so they don't have all these different tax shelters or ways they can, write off or stuff like that. But what can the average person do that they don't maybe know about to help lower their tax liability?
Well, that's a great question. Um, I gotta be honest with you, it really is, the tax system really is geared towards the rich person. There's a lot of things rich person like me, I saw firsthand, they can create, organization that's tax exempt under 501c3. And so they can create, make charitable contributions that are tax deductible, and they can get, you know, big deduction on that, their itemized deduction, especially if they have like a home mortgage interest. But yeah, it's just, that's a tough question because it really is rigged towards the rich person.
So for the average working person, then if they don't have, for instance, like an S corp or LLC, or they don't have um, any write offs or anything they can claim as liabilities, they're pretty much they're hit. They don't really. There's not a lot they can do, but continue to just work in the system. Then is what you're saying.
Well, yeah, I mean, unless they're dirt poor, then yeah, they're not gonna have to pay anything. But I mean, the tax system is the most worst towards the middle class person, the working person, the guy that he's not dirt poor, homeless, but he's not a rich guy either. He's kind of just you know working a job every day, gets a wage, kind of middle class. There, it's really hard. I mean, there's some things like you'll contribute to an IRA, the IRA deduction, HSA, if you have high deductible, health insurance. But yeah, there's so much more you can do if you're rich, and I saw it firsthand with these nonprofits. I'm telling you, people get confused. A lot of times people think, when talking to friends and whatnot, they think nonprofits is not much money. There's a ton of money in nonprofits.
Yes. So legally, how much does the nonprofit have to give to the cause that they're supposedly representing? So, say if they're doing a charity to say help kids with a certain birth defect or something. What percentage if we do a fundraiser and you raise, like, say for instance $1 million, what percentage of that do you have to actually give to the cause?
Well, that's a great point, because one thing that we look for is whether or not your expenses, a lot of times in order to get money, you have to fundraise, and that costs money to fundraise. We see whether or not your fundraising costs are commensurate, because there are tax shelters where, they just they contract people, they hire people, they pay a bunch of money to fundraise. There's not a whole lot of, money they can get fundraised. That's one thing that's, if that's the case, that's an organization we're going to try to get their exemption away from, deny them. But so, and it just depends. I mean, there's so many things to get around that too, because let's say you get some money, okay. So one way to get around it is that you say, oh, they're contracting someone, and sometimes a lot of these organizations, they'll have related, for-profit businesses, and depending on how they structure it, they create a conflict of interest policy. They put some things in their bylaws where they can actually legally make money off the nonprofit. And we see it, but the IRS, we can't do anything about it because they got the conflict of interest policy. They got certain things they need in their bylaws to get it. And, if we deny them exemption, they can go to court and they can get that reversed.
So as far as that number, that percentage number, is it an exact or the flexible?
It just depends. I can't really give you a percentage number.
Okay.
It could. I'm telling you, some of these organizations, they can really get away with a lot. We just can't get things to stick. Because one thing you have to keep in mind too is that, with these nonprofits, we have to keep in mind optics. And so a lot of times we'll see with these nonprofits, if they get denied or something or whatnot, I remember a couple of years back, there was an organization that was doing some very clear-cut political campaign interference. I believe it was a 501c3, and 501c3s, they can't do any political campaign interference. And in their denial letter, whoever the agent was, they mentioned something about Christmas caroling is not charitable. And that got some backlash in the media. The people were going, oh, Christmas caroling isn't charitable. Oh, Christmas caroling is religious. That's what the IRS says. What are they talking about? So that's another thing you have to keep in mind. That's another reason, too, why they're able to get away with so much. So I can't give you an exact percentage, but I can tell you there's a lot of cases where that's not always the case. There are some good organizations out there. There's a lot of cases where there's organizations, they don't give a whole lot out to the actual cause.
So for the most part, you're saying these 501cs, like when you see these people have these charitable fundraising galas and they have, like you said, all these exorbitant expenses with the meals, with the location, with the entertainment, and then they do, like, say, an auction, and at the end of the day, based on expenses and cost, it pretty much zeroes out. So it's like they made money, but they didn't make money.
Well, if it's really extreme enough, we can deny, and we can hope the court holds it up. I mean, if it's really
But I
extreme,
mean, if this organization is already established and they're doing these events, I'm saying that in all essence, when you talk about, like, okay, like I said, if they raised $1 million, but it costs, based on the entertainment, who they hire, the catering, everything, if it came out to $1 million, I mean, there's no way to really determine that, correct?
well, so I think I understand what your question is. So in that case, they would have to report it on their 990. Okay, so that would be, it would sound like if they're getting like fees from fundraising, that would be gross receipts related to the furtherance they'd say from related to the furtherance of exempt purpose, or sometimes they might even, report that as an other source of revenue. So we would know exactly how much revenue they're getting, assuming they're reporting it correctly. But or we can, there's some other things you can actually. We see enough flags. You can actually go and you can get a very intensive audit. We can do that. We can, but yeah. So you can do that, and we can look
So
again. We can look at the 990, see what expenses there are, see if there's anything else we can find. But yeah, people will be surprised. There's not a lot. There's some really interesting things. If you can,
now,
for your viewers, one of the things that's really interesting, if you go on the IRS website and you type in exempt organizations revenue rulings, there's some really fascinating reads of what are referred to as revenue rulings, or different things. Like, you'd be surprised where some of the things these organizations are allowed to do.
now I got a question for you. What is the actual law that requires an individual to actually pay taxes?
Um,
Because I've read stuff where it says taxes are voluntary. I'm just out of curiosity. What is the
yeah.
actual law that compels a person? Because it seems like it's a voluntary system.
Well, I gotta be honest with you, I'm not super familiar with. I've heard the things where, like, sovereign citizens, and I kind of, you kind of, see that sometimes when, as an IRS agent, when I was looking through things. But I'll tell you what, in practice, it's just not voluntary. That's
Well,
not
that's
how
what
it
I mean.
works.
But I mean, what's the actual law that says, like, a person who's working, whether you're farming or say you're privately contracting, that says you have to file taxes? Because most people are doing it just because they've been taught. But I'm saying, what is there an actual law that you know of that says by law you have to file? If you're out here digging ditches, you have to, file that you made this much money. I mean, I've never read it. I'm just curious if there is actual law.
I gotta be honest with you, I'm not super familiar with that. I, I just, I'm not super familiar with the exact law. I just know it. I can tell you. Well, we both know that in practice, it's just not how it is. But one thing I will add, the ditch digger, if they're really not getting by, there are things we call filing requirements. So, let's say they're only making like $10,000 in wages, and no one else can claim as a dependent. Okay, they don't even have to file a tax. In that case, they wouldn't pay any federal taxes. Um, but yeah, I'm be honest with you, I'm not exactly certain with any specific law. That's a good question. Kind of stumps me a
Yeah,
little bit.
because yeah, I'm just curious because I've seen like um, documentation floating around, and I'm just like wondering like what is the actual law? Because like I said, if a person is not profiting um, from the sale of real estate or stock dividends, then what is the law that says your labor should, you got to voluntarily pay taxes on it? You know what I mean? That's not considered income because people don't understand. There's a difference between a definition of income and wages.
Yeah. So yeah, to touch on that. So wages are just money that you earn. Wages and salaries are money you earn as an employee. Okay. So I'm working a
But is that
job.
Yeah, so okay, so wages you earn from a job, physical labor, income you earn from returns on investments, real estate, stock dividends, investments. So
So
one is both taxable, one taxable, and one's not taxable.
yeah. So unless it's tax exempt interest, your interest would be would be taxable. Interest, dividends, ordinary, qualified dividends are taxed at capital gains rates. Rental income, after expenses, it's taxable. Um, just yeah, sole proprietorship. If you're hustling and you're a sole proprietor, you fill out a Schedule C, and if you have any profit, that's taxable. And if you're making enough, it's eligible to self-employment tax. Um, S corp again, it gets taxed at. A lot of people don't understand this. S corp gets taxed at the it actually the S corp. It's a modified pass through. So generally speaking, the money you earn from the S corp, it flows down to the shareholders, and a lot of times, I mean, what I'll see is that you'll see, like, a single member S corp, you'll see the income, it flows to the shareholders, and also a lot of times they're working a wage. It's one way to get around the self-employment tax. But yeah, there are some examples that are that are of income that's not taxable. I do believe those are by statute.
Ha-
Um,
have you have you read anything that actually defines what a taxpayer is? Like, is it a definition in a book somewhere that shows that? Because I've read a lot of Black's Law dictionaries. I've never seen what is defined as a taxpayer under the United States Code. I mean, is there any? Do you know of an actual statute? Is there a statute that says, I know if you're a federal employee and you're contracted with the government, you're required as far as under the definition. But if you read anything else as far as that
yeah,
relates to
I'm
that,
not super familiar with that. I do think there's actually a statute with like if you're a resident of DC or if you are a working for the federal government or something like that, you have to pay taxes. But honestly, I think that you bring up a great point. I haven't thought about it a ton. I've heard some things too, like you know, uh, taxation of theft and things like that. Um, and unfortunately, I've seen some things the IRS that kind of makes me think that. But yeah, you bring up a good point. You kind of stumped me.
yeah, I just was curious because I mean, I've studied a lot of stuff and I had some people break some stuff down to me. So through my research, I've never found anything outside of, like you said, a federal government employee, like you're a member of the military, you live in Guam, Puerto Rico, District of Columbia, you're considered a United States citizen, therefore you're taxable under the United States Code. But I was just wondering for other people living in other states, like if there's anything, because a lot of people they don't really, people don't really understand the tax code, and there's a lot of stuff right now in the news about like Deutsche, looking into the IRS and
Oh yeah,
uncovering a lot
I would
of
love it.
ways.
As an IRS whistleblower, I've written to a lot of people. I've written to congressmen. Um, I've written to a lot of different departments within the IRS. I would love Elon Musk or Donald Trump, whoever, reach out to me. I would love to help them cut some waste. Help out firefighters, and a lot of it, like especially the firefighters, just enforce things already on the books. So yeah, shout out to your viewers, please. They could help me get in contact with one of those higher up guys. I would love to make it happen. Make our country better again. Um, but yeah, going back to your question, I do know in practice. Okay, I'm be honest with you, I'm not super familiar with those statutes. That you bring up some good points, but I do know in practice, a U.S. citizen, they're supposed to report all worldwide income. So, like a U.S. citizen, like if, for example, they travel out to Germany, okay, they're supposed to report all income, okay. Now, there's some foreign earned income exclusion, like they work a job in Germany, I don't know, like making bread or something like that. There's foreign earned income exclusion where they get to exclude that in their U.S. tax return. There's also the foreign tax credit. They're paying tax on income that's foreign, and they get to use that as a non-refundable credit. But again, that's in practice. I think you bring up some good points. Um, I I'm not super familiar with the statute. It's just something that's in practice.
Now, I had another question for you. Based on what you've seen, and we've seen how with all the waste and spending that really didn't go to anything regarding the infrastructure or the American people. And it seems like they raise enough money just through corporate tax and transportation tax and all this other stuff. Do you realistically think that people need to be taxed, or taxation a way to keep people on the hamster wheel? Because in my opinion, it seems like with all the excise tax, the gas tax, the trucking companies that are using, they're taxing the hell out of all those big businesses. Why
They're
should the
taxing the
guy
hell
who, like
out of
you
me,
said,
Big Kirk. They're taking
yeah, so
my
why
money.
should the guy, middle class guy, why should he be getting taxed like that? It makes no sense.
You know, Here's what I'll say about that. If this is a nonprofit, and they said, like, for example, they're helping, kids out that had, physical defects or mental defects or whatnot. And we audited and we found out that all their money was going to a handful of people in Ukraine. They would get denied exemption. And they they'd probably get shut down.
Yeah, but the thing is, that was happening, and those places weren't shut down until just recently. So this has been going on for a long time. So my point being is, when we now that this is exposed, it's almost like you pulled the curtain back, and for all the people that had been paying into a system, you realize they really didn't need your money, because if they were able to waste all that money, imagine if the people were able to keep all that money, how much better your life would be, how much more money those people would have for their families. It makes no sense. Now
Yeah.
you're really telling on yourself, saying that people should be taxed, period. Because you had all the money, you wasted it, and it still didn't do anything. You know what I mean? It makes no sense.
Yeah, I mean, it's a broken system, It benefits, the person it benefits the most is the rich person that may or may not want to do something that's, kind of
Let me
shame.
run an idea by you. Like you said, the rich person, right? So imagine these people who promote, or who really support the income tax system, right? These
Mhm.
companies, these people at the very top now, if those people, because they already know how to lower their tax liability, so it doesn't affect them. Oh, we're going to tax you. The more you tax them, it doesn't matter, because they're still not paying the taxes, because they know how to work the system. But imagine now, if the people that work for them weren't taxed as much, how much further those people could get ahead in life to now acquire more wealth. But it seems like to me, if you want to keep your wealth and keep everybody beneath you poor, you want them to be taxed as much as possible, because they'll never understand the tax system. Does that sound reasonable?
Yeah, I mean, corporations, like for example, these large corporations, they're not even nonprofits. The corporation themselves, not just the individuals, they benefit a lot from these nonprofits. I'll give you an example, you know, and there's actually revenue ruling on this. So a corporation, okay, they can they can donate, they can donate lands, okay, to 501c3 as a public charity, you know, and if it's publicly supported, okay, they can put land there. What they can do is they say, "Oh, look, that's that's not just a lot right next to our building. No, 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 that's a public park. Okay, that's a public park. It's tax exempt. It's furthering charitable purposes. Okay, and then what we'll do is like, okay, yep, see, we got a public park that's furthering charitable purpose. Oh, yep, hey, we got a note from the city city hall that says, oh, hey, we're lessening the burdens of government. It's charitable. Hey, guess what? We want some money. Hey, government, we like some money. Hey, so and so that's looking to give out money. We want some money. It's tax deductible. And just like that,
Mm.
it just keeps piling up on itself. I mean, for example, just to make it very clear, individual, so like me, like for Big Hurt, let's say you yourself, Big Hurt, you wanted to be a nonprofit organization, you get instantly denied because an individual cannot be a nonprofit organization. However, you know, an organization, and you got to keep in mind these organizations, these are these aren't actual living things, okay? These are these are kind of they're almost a great way to think of an organization or a corporation as an idea, okay? They if you think about it, they get better tax treatment than you because like an individual like you and I, if we just want to be ourselves and be tax exempt, we get instantly denied. But a corporation, an idea, it is tax exempt. It's just another
So
great.
no, I didn't mean to cut you off, but you just made a great point there. So you're actually telling the people who are human, flesh and blood, that you're better off or operating in a corporate capacity, because the system favors corporations, legal fictions, more than it does working regular people.
Yeah. Oh yeah, it does. Um it really does, Big Kirk, and it's so backwards. It's
You know,
just
so let me run this by you. So imagine if the average guy, like you said, he's making 150, 200,000 a year. He's paying into his IRA account. He has a 401k. He has, a house, maybe some investments, some other stuff going on. But if he was to operate in a corporate capacity and say his income, rather than getting paid as an individual, he created himself as a corporation with this as an entity. He would actually be better off tax wise, because as that legal fiction, that entity, he can have more benefits within the system to lower his tax liability. Is that correct?
Well, yeah, they're doing good for the community. Like, if they're, you know, if they're gonna, further charitable or educational purposes, something like that. I've seen it. A lot of people be so impressed. There's a lot of ways you can actually make money, not just donations. Okay, you can actually sell things and still be tax exempt under 501(c)(3). So, one way they can go
How's that?
around doing this. So
How would you do that?
that's a bit complicated, but one of the ways you could do it is you could start, like, say, a religious organization, okay? And you could talk about, God is great, and talk about how great God is and how God saved your life. So you know, you got to be careful, because if there's some things you can do. It's a little bit complex, but you got to make sure it's not, but at least on paper, it's not similar to commercial way. There are
Mm-hmm.
ways organizations can literally go and sell, like, books about religion and say, "Oh, these are fees from the furtherance of exempt purposes." Not only are they not taxable, okay, our organization itself is tax exempt, which means they don't pay taxes, and we're eligible to receive tax deductible contributions. Okay, but and there's
So
some things that.
all the property you see that those big churches sit on and all that stuff, that's all tax exempt.
Yeah, it's tax exempt. I mean, there are things you can do to get your exemption denied, but I mean, if it's just like obvious, like if it's an obvious tax shelter, but there's some things you can do, not even so much how you operate, just what you put in your bylaws. A lot of things, for example, the conflict of interest policy. I see that, people use that a lot. Or a conflict of interest policy will look something like this, okay? And You know, this is for organizations, that are trying to do business related for profits. They'll say, "Hey, we'll have a board meeting, okay?" And so the board meeting, okay, the people that own the related for profit, okay, they won't sit on the vote whether or not we do business related for profit, okay? And even though that person, he pays our salaries and whatnot, we promise we're going to be fair and honest about our vote. And so, yeah, we all voted to do business that related for profit, and so there you go, just like that. You know, they're not a tax sham. They're just you know trying to further charitable and educational purposes, and that related for profit. Oh yeah, it's just something there to help them. It's not way to you know for the related parties to enrich themselves or create an environment. It's just a way to help the community, do some great good. And a lot of people will laugh at this, but a lot of times the IRS, I can tell you firsthand, we don't like to deny things that are like slam dunk. So, like a slam dunk. Let's say a church is formed okay, and the pastor, okay, he takes in like 95% of the funds, okay. That's a Nerman, okay. That you can't have that; they'll get denied, okay. But here's the thing: let's say like a pastor, okay, instead of just taking like 95% of the funds that the church gets, he just structures a salary, okay. He and the rest of the governing body, they form what's called an employment agreement or something to that effect. Some sort of written document that says, okay, hey, you know, the governing body, we interviewed you, whatnot, yada yada yada, and now, okay, that person, he'll get 80% of the salary, or well, they won't say 80% of the salary. He'll get a salary of such and such amount a year, okay, and they can figure like, okay, it'd be like 80 to 70%, okay, and they'll say, hey, he's not enriching himself, okay, he's just performing services, for the furtherance of the the organization, okay, he's just an employee because he adds a lot of value, okay, you know it'd be amazing how you can get around some things just by what you put on paper
Mm,
and how you
makes sense.
structure it.
Is there anything else you'd like to share with the viewers?
Um, just you know, uh, just yeah, I really hope the really the government, especially the IRS as a whole, can turn around because I've seen the IRS firsthand that it's it's very corrupt. And I really hope things can turn around. And yeah, please, your viewers, if you're listening, please tell Elon Musk, tell Donald Trump, tell them to get in contact with me. Nothing else, we can help out the the fire departments. I can help them out because there's just stuff on paper that they just don't want to enforce, and trying not to enforce that. If they just enforce, they'll help out the fire departments.
All right, well, Grant, I appreciate you coming on, man, and wish you the best, bro. And thank you for reaching out, man.
Thank you, sir. I really appreciate you letting me on this platform, and I'm blessed to be a part of it.
Thank you. Take care, man. God bless you.
You too.
Big Kirk 916, fresh out.